Knights are known for many things: shining armor, kite shields, visored helmets, and lances. But perhaps the most used item in a knight's arsenal is the arming sword. Any knight caught without one might just be a dead man. So what happens if a knight not only loses his sword, but also his entire sword hand? Most would succumb to their condition and leave their adventuring days behind them. But one man overcame this hurdle and added a new item to the knight's arsenal: the Iron Hand. Götz von Berlichingen was born on November 15th of 1480 in Swabia, located in modern-day southwest Germany. He hailed from a line of minor Swabian nobles. His father Kilian was a knight, as was his father before him. Being the fifth-born son to a lesser noble in the Holy Roman Empire meant you did one of two things: join the clergy, or join the cavalry. Götz only received a military education as his inheritance, but that would prove to be all he needed. By 17, he was knighted and joined the army of his liege lord, who himself was joining the army of the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian Habsburg. Götz immediately saw action fighting in the Low Countries. This, however, only lasted for a year before he returned to Swabia. But he didn't return off duty. In 1499, the Swabian War kicked off. This pitted the armies of the Emperor and the Swabian League, a mutual defense pact inside the Holy Roman Empire, against another, more deadly alliance: the Swiss Confederacy. Opposing the norms of medieval knights, the Swiss warriors were the best pikemen in the world. The now 18-year-old Götz would bear witness as the Austrian and Swabian armies seemingly fell on the wall of spikes. The Emperor lost this war within a few months. Hereafter, Götz left the military to forge his own path on the battlefield. The young knight became a mercenary, but not just some lowly Landsknecht. Götz started his own company of mercenaries and became their captain, aged only 19. Götz and his hired band traveled all over the Empire, enlisting their services to the Duke or Count with the highest bid. This eventually led him right back to southern Germany. A succession dispute had erupted over the Duchy of Landshut. Duke Albert of Bavaria hired Götz, bolstering his army for the upcoming and surely bloody siege. As promised, this siege would be one to remember, especially for Götz. Sometime during the start of the fight, a stray cannonball hit him on the hand, causing his sword to spin in the air and come down on his arm. The cut was clean, taking the young knight's hand at the wrist. With his hand practically surgically amputated, the doctors could do nothing but bandage his stump. Götz would recover, but he could never use his sword arm again. His fighting days were over. Götz fell into a deep depression after this, drinking heavily and ignoring his mercenary band. But he found a renewed sense of hope one day when he saw one of his own men lose his entire arm during a fight. The man didn't concede, but picked his sword right back up with his other hand and continued fighting. This eventually inspired the one-handed Götz to seek out a particularly skilled blacksmith. He paid the man a hefty sum to create a one-of-a-kind prosthetic, fit for a knight. What the blacksmith, in collaboration with a local saddle maker, produced was a masterpiece of medieval engineering. The Iron Hand came complete with fingers which could bend to fit around the handle of a sword. Götz had his sword hand back, and a new reputation to go along with it. Hereafter, he would be known as Götz of the Iron Hand. This unnamed blacksmith would go on to create another, even more advanced metal hand. The palm was adjustable and each finger could move separately at the joints, leaving it adjustable for any occasion. It was so fine-tuned that he could even use a pen with it. Whoever this blacksmith was, he was well ahead of his time. The iron-handed knight picked his sword back up and never looked back. His years spent inactive turned Götz into an angry man, willing to start a fight with just about anyone. These fights would eventually turn into feuds, basically the medieval equivalent of a personal and justifiable declaration of war against someone or someplace. Götz wouldn't just start feuds with people, but also entire cities. For a minor noble, starting a feud was an easy way to make slightly dirty money. Götz would steal and generally undermine the cities he feuded with. Some knights faked their chivalry. Götz did not. One particularly long and heated feud was with the city of Nuremberg. In 1512, Götz would take it a step too far. With a small retinue of his followers, the Iron Hand robbed a merchant caravan on its way to the city. The robber knight would go unpunished as the Holy Roman Emperor stamped an imperial ban on him. This meant that Götz was confined to his own lands. More importantly, it also made it completely legal to kill him. Usually when an imperial ban happened, the German nobility would pick the band apart. But no one was dumb enough to try that. The imperial ban lasted for 2 years before Götz was able to pay it off in 1514. After this, he resumed his life as a skilled mercenary captain. It didn't take long before the boisterous Götz was back to his feuding ways. This time the city of Mainz had angered the iron-handed knight. He and his personal army invaded and subsequently captured a Mainzian count. He thus held the man hostage for ransom and regained all of the cash he had just lost from his imperial ban, plus some. With this refound wealth, Götz purchased his own castle in 1517, Hornburg. Although a quaint fort, it represented something more than just defense. After being born as a minor noble and inheriting nothing, he now had a castle and an army to man its walls. He wasn't a lord officially, but he might as well have created his own micro-state. And just when everything was getting back on track is exactly when he got another imperial ban. Still, nobody came to kill Götz, especially now since he was the proud owner of a castle. He paid this ban off soon after it was placed onto him. Götz managed to anger the emperor on 2 occasions, and lived to tell the tale. His fame rose alongside his disobedience. Not even a year after his second ban, Götz of the Iron Hand found his latest contract. Duke Ulrich of Württemberg hired the Iron Hand Knight to fight none other than the Swabian League, who he had fought alongside during the Swiss War. The Duke of Württemberg was on the back end of this war. He stationed his new mercenary company in the border town of MacLeod. The Swabians set a ferocious attack on the village. Götz and his outnumbered band were surrounded. They fought until their cannonballs ran dry. Then there was no hope that they would win. Before any more could die, Götz honorably surrendered. As a defeated mercenary in the Holy Roman Empire, tradition permitted that they be released by whoever they surrendered to. But the Swabian League had no issue imprisoning one of their own. Götz of the Iron Hand would spend the next 4 years in prison. Finally, after so much troublemaking, he was doing his time. By 1522, on the insistence of many fellow knights, Götz was released and his hand returned. After he paid his ransom, of course. For the next 3 years, Götz would return to his mercenary work. These days were relatively quiet for the usually loud knight. In 1525, Götz would find himself in an unusual predicament. Due to a long-standing rivalry between the nobles of the Swabian League and the poverty-stricken commoners, a peasants' revolt broke out. One that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the French Revolution. The rebel commoners came to Götz's castle, apparently asking if he would be their leader. His reputation among the peasants was one of near reverence. His disobedient nature was inspiring to those who could do nothing against their masters. Götz was elected supreme leader of the peasant mob, despite putting down a peasant revolt while in the service of Württemberg. He soon directed the popular wrath onto the city of Weinsberg. What followed was an unspeakable massacre of the rich and poor alike. By sacking whole cities, the peasants did more damage to their own cause than they ever did good. For unknown reasons, likely to protect his own life, Götz retired from his post as peasant leader after a month. Hereafter, he returned to the safety of his castle. Soon enough, up to 200,000 lay dead in front of the Swabian nobles. The revolt had utterly been crushed by the heavy hand of the upper classes. And now that it was over, the Emperor was hunting down their leaders. Götz of the Iron Hand was at the top of this bounty list. The Imperial army personally went to his castle and demanded that he and his hired blades surrender. What he said while screaming out his window was probably the greatest comeback in medieval history. "He can kiss my ass." Yes, he quite literally told the Emperor to smooch his touche. This was the first recorded instance of this phrase being used. While he likely didn't invent it, he certainly popularized it. It wasn't long before Götz would eventually be forced into surrender. He was brought to the Emperor and a court of the highest nobility to answer for his crimes during the Peasants' War. At the Diet of Speyer, Götz was pardoned of his crime by giving the most bullshit answer. After telling the Emperor to kiss his ass, he told the Diet that he only led the peasants because he thought he could lessen the total destruction that they would cause. The man sacked a whole city and took its wealth only to say, "It could have been worse." Somehow, the council bought this ridiculous assertion and let Götz return to his humble castle. He was promised a safe trip, but upon his arrival, was captured and imprisoned yet again by his own countrymen. This was hardly legal, but the man was a 3-time criminal at this point, so the Emperor just looked away. After spending 2 more years in a Swabian jail, Götz was released, on the condition that he never leave his own land. And for once, Götz agreed, finally loosening his metal hand and putting down his sword. He would spend his retirement like any good German would, and began drinking heavily. He also began writing his own story, so everyone could enjoy his fascinating life. The book can still be read to this day, and is the basis for any biography on the Prosthetic Knight. After spending a decade in an inebriated peace, Götz would suddenly be thrusted into the front lines of a battle yet again. The Emperor was looking for experienced generals to fight off the growing threat of the Ottoman Empire. Charles Habsburg agreed to lift his house arrest, but only if he would join his military. The knight who told the Imperials to kiss his ass was now leading their army. He remained in Hungary from 1540 to 1542. The fighting was a grogging stalemate throughout most of that time. In 1542, a new front to this war was opened when France invaded the Holy Roman Empire. With assistance from their Ottoman allies, the Austrians were put on the back foot in this conflict. When Götz arrived, the Imperial armies were already planning their counter-invasion of France. The plan would follow through, although it's doubtful that the 66-year-old knight personally saw any real fighting. By 1546, the two-front war came to an end. Nobody won. It was just expensive and useless. With this, the old iron-handed knight returned to his long-overdue retirement. After all of his hardships, the knight went on to live for another 15 years, finally dying in his castle as a blind and handless man at the age of 81. The life of Götz of the Iron Hand is simply one of a kind. He remains a popular, near mythical figure in Germany. For many, he was the real-life German representation of a Robin Hood. In his many feuds, he stole from the rich, gave to his poor merry band of mercenaries, and utterly disobeyed the Emperor's every wish. He was a hero to the lower classes. I mean, doesn't everyone at some point just want to go up to their boss and tell him to kiss your ass? If you ever grow a pair and do that, you can thank Götz for that feeling. And you can thank him for losing your job. If you'd like to support this stoic historian, feel free to do so on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and join Derek Clark, Savak Leo Nazarian, Taj Guilford, Nickmate Voician, Lazarus Dykos, and Dave J. Or become a YouTube channel member, like Derek Clark again, Donald Vincent, and What? Why? Thank you guys again for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it.